You're all very welcome to this first ever live episode of the Publin Podcast. You're joining us, if you're listening at home, in Cleary's pub on Amiens Street. I'm joined by an audience here of some of whom are friends, a lot of whom have interests in the history of Dublin Dockers. And we're here to celebrate a new exhibition that's going on up near Dublin Port in the refurbished Substation building. The name of the exhibition is Solidarity, the Dockers of Dublin Port. I'll tell you more about that at the end, but I will say quickly, it's on from Thursday to Sunday from 11:30 to 3:30, and it is free if you want to get yourself down there. So if you're a new listener to Publin, or you in the audience have never heard of this podcast or possibly any podcast before, I just want to tell you a little bit about kind of the ethos of it. So it's a social history podcast, and as the title would suggest, we talk about pubs, but the pubs aren't the be-all and the end-all. The pubs are kind of the window through which we can look at various aspects of Dublin culture, life of its citizens. So we use the pub to get started on a topic and then expand out. So we're not going to be talking about pubs exclusively tonight. I'm going to talk about people's lives, their personal and their working lives. So I'll stop rambling on because I've got two people here with me this evening who are much more adept and knowledgeable about talking about Dublin Port and the lives of Dublin Dockers, both their history and more in a contemporary sense. So I'm joined by Daryl from the Little Museum of Dublin and Charlie from Dublin Port. So I wanted to ask Charlie Murphy, would you give us a little rundown on what your connection is with Dublin Port and your personal and professional connection?
Well, I was born and reared in Ringsend, so close to the docks and seeing ships and coming in and out and whatever. So probably from an early school age, I was probably connected to the docks, going over with the boatmen as a kid, tying up the ships. Before ISPS came in, all this top security and health and safety and all of that. So I'd be on the quay as a 13 or 14-year-old maybe, giving the Lawlesses or the Pullins and the boatmen, the Burns out of Ringsend, just giving them a dig out for a day out. And we probably got an ice cream at the end. We were good. So, and it was always get across in a boat. They'd have their own boats. They always had to have that. So got a bit of experience out of that. Used to do a bit of salmon fishing on the river when I got a bit older, 15 or so. Wasn't that legal now, it was a bit of poaching, but however, it's all over now. But so, and families done that. There was a lot of fishermen in Ringsend, and the salmon fishing was a kind of an extra bit of money that could come in. So then I kind of, when you're doing this kind of stuff, you get talking to people or people, you're listening to the older ones, and they're talking about places all around the world, and you're kind of thinking, Jesus, will I ever make it there, So I decided to, Father didn't want me to do it, but however, I got a job on a small little coaster, and my mother signed a letter because I was underage, 17, you had to be 18 to go on your own. So, and off I went. So I went to sea for a few years, a few different companies, ended up with Irish Shipping. And with Irish Shipping, the connection with the port really came in then was, there's a couple of, they had gearmen in the port at the time. And I got my certificates up to a level where I could, when they went on holidays, I could relieve them because knew how to splice wire and splice rope and knew the stuff. So Johnny Farrell was the first one. I relieved him for his holidays the first time. Jim McCain, who's passed away now, the lads had known him around here. Jimmy was passed away in a major accident on the docks itself. But so that kind of gave me an in to the port then. And then I kind of went back to sea again and spent a few more years. And I came home one time and this guy came along to me who was working in the port and said, they're looking for guys in the port for relief work. So I said, I'll have a go at it, But I didn't want to go straight away because I just left the ship and I had a good payoff in my hands, so with plenty of cash. So he came knocking on, that was on a Sunday. There was a regatta on in Ringsend, and the Sunday he said to me, do this fine. So we all went on the beer after we got on Sunday night, and Monday morning he's knocking on the door. You're right. Interview for you in the port. And I said, we leave it till another day. So he got me out, showered, changed, and over to the port I went, and I met with one of the harbour masters over there, Captain Greavy, and he said, okay, when can you start? And I said, well, when do you want me? So he said, tomorrow, which I thought would have been a week's time, but anyway, it was tomorrow. So it started the next day. So I started relief work and it was like on the tugs, the pilot boats, VTS as it is now. It's a hailing station, or it was the hailing station then, pilot boats. So the old graving dock where the pump house is now. So great experience. So you got a good run around everything that was happening within the port. Knew a lot of the lads that worked on the docks anyway. So it was, good experience. And then went back again, and then spent about, I think it was 9 months the next time. And when I came back home, I was asked to go in again to relieve, and that was it. Then I kind of stayed there since.
So you're from Ringsend, so would you have been surrounded by families who would have worked the docks, the ports? Yeah. And it would have been kind of a natural progression for anybody in that area to go to?
I would reckon every second house in Ringsend at that time would have had someone working on the docks, someone at sea, or someone connected with shipping in some way, whatever way. You wouldn't do this. It wouldn't be the same today. Yeah. But that's the way it was then.
I suppose somebody from my generation, to me up until a few years ago, Dublin Port was this way off thing that you never went to see. It wasn't kind of in the heart of the city, or you didn't pay any notice to it, even though everything you consumed came through there for the most part. So we've seen photographs, and bringing it back to pubs, Daryl. If you look at the remaining early houses today, a lot of them stretch down the quays, of course, but all the way down. There's a lot of them concentrated around Capel Street, which we wouldn't, in this day and age, associate with Dublin Port or shipping or docking. So how far would the activities of the port have gone down the Liffey?
So, I think the one thing is to try and get back into the portscape is really difficult for people to envisage.
Yeah.
One good barometer is to think about the ballast office, which they basically handled all activity in the port, and that was on Westmoreland Street. So much further down than people would think, and that was a very strategic place. It was the thoroughfare, then, which was Sackville Street, obviously now O'Connell Street. But as you say, those early houses, 7 a.m. early licences, they were there for labourers, particularly dockers. Gave people an opportunity to have a drink before, during and after work, potentially. And
how would people have been selected for work? Because I know there's usually many more people to work a job, or 20 people for one job or so on. How were people selected for that work? Was it non a system? Was it done there on the docks, or was there kind of elements of within the pub that people would have been selected through various means, or friendship, or so on like that?
So dock work, men were hired for dock work during through a process that was called the Reed. And the Reed was effectively, they were held on both sides both quay sides of the River Liffey, north and south, and within the port gates themselves. And what you would have is men would come down to the docks in the wee hours. Usually these reeds were held between 7 and 8 o'clock. A couple of hundred men would gather. You would have a stevedore or a foreman standing on a platform above these seas of men, and they would basically pick men for work. So, you could be looking for 60 men, 100 men. There could be 200 men there. And in terms of that, it was casualised work, basically. So really fickle. And you can imagine the anxiety of having to turn up for work every day to try and obtain work this way. Now, so if we think about the early 20th century, that was primarily how men got work, so they turned up like that. In 1947, obviously a couple of years after the war, there had been a system implemented in the UK, and they tried to adopt a similar system here, and they adopted these voluntary registers, basically, for workers. And there were 2 registers. One was for cross-channel dockers, coalies, who were dockers who primarily worked on coal, and then deep-sea dockers. Now, just for your listeners, I think it's probably important just to distinguish what they are. So cross-channel, it's basically ships coming across the channel. So, British ports, so you're talking Liverpool, London, Bristol, Glasgow. And deep sea was ships that were coming from potentially all over the world. Australia, South America, Africa. So they would have generally came in to the likes of, Ocean Pier, into Alexandra Basin. So that was all deep sea, larger ships. And then usually the smaller ships would have came right up, as you were saying, right down the quays. So it's really hard for people to imagine, even cranes extending right down the quaysides, down to Custom House Quay. Yeah. It's very hard to imagine that. So there were over 60 cranes at its height, going right down the quays and into Alexandra Basin. So I think that's really hard to imagine.
Yes, it's hard to fathom. There's a working model of one of those cranes in the exhibition, which is, I don't think it's there to be played with or anything, but it's a really cool example of
it can be looked at and admired.
Exactly.
John.
Yes. Yeah. Looked at but don't touch. But that system of selecting people through the read, how late would that have gone on? Like, Charlie, would you have witnessed that at all, or would you have known people that would have gone through that system a lot?
I would have heard the stories about it. I think that finished in the 60s. Around the 60s was I think the button came in the 60s.
Right.
So
so that was the button is, I should have clarified that. So this voluntary register of names for these men, it was basically the unions brought in, as Charlie said, this button. And the men who held that were effectively, they had preferential selection for jobs. Yeah. So after 1947, if you had this button, so your name was on this register, you had a number, you had a button, and you're entitled to work. So if you turned up at a read with a button, you had to be selected first.
Right, yeah.
And it could be passed on as well.
And it could be passed on as well.
So it could be father to son, so down through the chain of family. Yeah.
So if the father died, it was often given to the mother, the wife, to basically give that button out. And usually it was sort of like primogeniture, like you have a farm, usually the firstborn inherits, something similar like that. Generally it was given to the firstborn, but if the firstborn son wasn't in the house, he had his own family, he'd moved off, it would be given to a younger son who was still at home, because there's the pragmatism of, he was earning an income for the household, for the family house, and that caused a lot of strife in families. And some of the former Dockers who I've spoken to would tell stories about families and brothers who never reconciled because of who got the button. But they had the option. So as I said, 1947, that system comes in. But not, only 650 Dockers got those buttons initially. Usually the ones with the longest service, the men with the longest service, were given those buttons and put on that register. But there were men who didn't take it, because there was sort of an onus on you to do the work if you had the button. So some men preferred, having the options of it. But, it caused strife as well between those who had buttons and those who didn't, because sons who got a button and, turned up for work, they'd be entitled to work. There could be guys there who are there 10, 20, 30 years, and they didn't have, this young whippersnapper comes up, whatever age he was, 17, 18, and he goes straight into a job. So, it's it was tough work, it was fickle.
You say it's tough work. I guess this is at a time when, as you say, like, there's a lot of manual, it would have been totally manual labour to remove stuff from ships. Would there been a benefit to working a ship that brought in coal versus to one that brought in timber? Or, would Dockers be fighting over, verbally fighting over what ships they got to work in terms of what was brought in?
I think it was, you were on a raid, and if you were called out for a ship that discharging coal or grain or whatever, that's, and there was gangs. So they normally have, I don't know, some ships could have 6 or 7 hatches. So there'd be a gang to each hatch.
Okay.
So assigned to that, and that they discharge that.
They'd be specialised as well in terms of what they would offload.
Containerisation wasn't really brought in at that stage. So, even in the 70s, 80s, there was still a lot of break bulk cargoes like timber, bales of timber. And some of it wasn't even bales. Some of it had to be manually, plank by plank, put into slings and then taken out and dropped in. Steel, barrels of whatever, even Hector Gray, when he'd bring, I think it was Blue Funnel brought in Hector Gray stuff from China, and it'd be all just in cardboard boxes. So, and that all had to be into nets and taken out, and, so it's a totally different world then, And as I say, the port was more open then. I could stroll around it as a kid, and, and it was okay. But today it's a different time. Containerisation brought in a whole different game. In a gang, I don't know, the lads will tell you later on more. But I mean, there could have been 15 in a gang for a certain ship. And then a container ship comes in, and that gang, okay, there's 2 hatches on it, so there's 2 gangs of 15. For a container ship. Now a container ship works with probably 2 guys, or 3 guys, maybe 2 on the wall, or 4 and 2 on the ship. That's it. And they may not need the guys on the ship at all.
Yeah.
So the crew will probably unlash the containers, and then the boys come in with the crane and just lift them out and drop them on the quay. It's all so mechanised now. It's totally different. But it was a big shock to a system that had so many men working in it.
Yeah. Would it have been a sharp change from the manual aspect to containerization, or is it kind of gradual, and would there have to be negotiations with the unions as to how many containers are allowed in, or is it just this is the way forward? I
think at the beginning it was that kind of thing was happening. But I mean, the way the economy works, you just got to get on with it now. You know what I mean? This is the way the world is changing.
Yeah.
So and you got to change with it, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
And people copped on eventually that containerization is here. How are we going to manage this one? Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people would have said it's not going to happen. We're not going to let it happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like in the dry dock, like a ship came in. I remember when I started there first, guys wouldn't use rollers.
Right.
So you just get the job done too quick. So it was a brush, and it took ages, years for people to turn around and the union negotiations for them to take down the rollers or take up the rollers and put down the brushes. So
Speaking of the implements used by Dockers in the exhibition itself, there's a number of I would call them hooks, but I'm sure there's more technical names for a lot of the equipment that the Dockers would have used. So what have you managed to collect together, and where from, Daryl, for the exhibition?
So we've been very lucky to have worked with the Dublin Dock Workers Preservation Society, and they have a fabulous collection of tools ranging from, as you say, hooks, generally different types of hooks. I suppose the quintessential hook, the image that people would have in their heads, some people call it the longshoresman's hook. It's quite a large hook. They call it that in the US particularly. So they would have used them for bigger, bagged cargo. But then with some more precious cargo, you had to handle that with care. Mm-hmm. So cocoa beans, sugar. People don't realise, Charlie was saying, this all had to be broken down, manually. Yeah. The bags could weigh anywhere between 4 stone to 24 stone. And you're required to physically haul them out. Now, look, as you say, there could be crane, there could be winches and pulleys pulling this stuff out. But those hooks basically helped you. If you can imagine, you're lifting bags all day, 10 whatever hours a day. The likes of bag hooks, say, they've smaller little kind of prongs on it. You could lash that into a bag to help you lift it up, and it just help you get a grip on it, because your grip, you'd lose grip. Even your hands, the muscles in your hands would be physical. And I think it's really if you go to the exhibition, you see even, say, the number 7 shovel, which coalies would have used to lift coal. That itself weighed over a stone.
I picked it up the other day. I couldn't believe how heavy that is, that people were shoveling coal all day. It shows what a wimp I am, I guess, rather than anything else. But it's incredible weight to it.
That's over a stone, and then you're averaging probably, out of, a big lift. If you could probably lift up to 4 stone on top of that. But you're probably averaging, if you're a dock worker operating on coal, on a coal ship, you're probably averaging 2 stone to 3 stone on top of that. Yeah. So you're lifting, between 3 and 4 stone, probably on average a lift. Mm-hmm. So it was tough work, really tough work.
I think they had a skill. There was a skill to coal. Mm-hmm. The lads will tell you that it was put into a bucket, a big bucket, lowered into the hatch, hooked onto the crane, and they would dig a hole for themselves for the bucket to go in, and they have a knack to it. You know what I mean? And they'd fill these things up, and
it's skilled work. Yeah, I mean, if you went in green, into a hatch to try and unload stuff, you'd be quickly shown how to do it properly, because the other lads would have to pick up your slack. Do you know what I mean? Like, the work had to be done. You didn't have all the time in the world to unload a ship. It had to be done. You might have a day to do it. You might have a couple of days to do it, depending on what commodities were coming in. I think, depending on the ships, you could have anything on board. It could be anything, it could be coal, it could be timber, it could be ore, iron ore, copper ore, could be guano, which is a particularly horrible commodity that came in. It was used as fertilizer. Guano.
I'm familiar with it.
Droppings, yeah. I'm familiar with it, yeah. So usually with bird droppings, it was used as fertilizer. But, horrible stuff to have to deal with.
Yeah.
Pulp was another really difficult one. Basically pulped wood and stuff, and you have to shovel that. Really difficult, tiring work. As one docker was recorded as one saying, it was inside a hatch was no place for a clergyman's son.
Okay. Very good. To bring it back to the pub again, as that is my speciality. I suppose the pub did definitely play a big part in the life rather of Dockers in many senses. Both in a positive and a negative way. We're not just talking about having crack in the rare old times. People drank to escape as well as to have fun. And it was part of Dockers' lives. I suppose the pub would have functioned as a place you got work and basically had fun, but also your bank as well. There was a lot of stuff that went on in the pub for Dockers in days that gone by. Either of you familiar with the process of, as I've read it, leaving down a drink for somebody in terms of being able to get work?
Yeah, I've heard. There's stories to go around that
Charlie didn't do it.
Yeah, Charlie didn't. There are stories go around that and there was one about the matchbox being left, and there was a few bob left in that, so he get the job the next time. So there was all sorts of them stories went around. Yeah. But the pub at the time, when you think about it, was we talked about discharging the coal boat. You can imagine what state them men came out in. The dust that was in it. Yeah. And there was no masks. There was no, totally. So to go for a point and wash all that stuff down and just relax and have a chat with all the lads was, So the social end of it was always there, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There was always rivalry as well. Between Ringsend and the North Side as well, that's going to happen. Yeah. But they always had that kind of, that bond. And the pub was the place that people met. How many restaurants were in Dublin in the 60s? Think about it. Mm-hmm. So, how many social clubs were in the city in the 60s for working class people? Probably none. Yeah. So that was the social point for everyone, you know what I mean? So it was the way it was.
Was that kind of like a less formal version of other trades would have a working men's club?
Yeah.
But Dockers didn't have anything so formal, but there was plenty of pubs around the city known for.
And don't forget, all these men knew one another. And if just in Ringsend alone, the wives would know, the wives of other dockers. So it was a family kind of thing. Yeah. And don't forget, the dock workers were family. As I said, the button was passed down through families. Mm-hmm. So there was all of that, So,
You spoke about the rivalry between North and South Side. I suppose, I know I'm from Blanchardstown, so that's probably not even, I'm considered County Dublin, I suppose, going back. But I think in modern days, you think of North-South divide as kind of as a class divide of the other kind, but the North-South divide between Ringsend and Northwell would be...
Well, it's I explained, I'm originally from Ringsend, and then I got married and moved to East Wall. And the only way, the shortest way to get from East Wall to Ringsend at the time was by ferry.
Really?
Yeah. So my wife used to go down to the North Wall, get the kids and pram down onto the ferry and across the Ringsend slip and up to her mother. Because the nearest bridge, I think, at the time was Butt Bridge.
Of course, yeah.
So she'd have to walk through Butt Bridge and back down again. So the ferry was the lifeline back and forward across the Liffey for everyone, So, and even for dock workers, North Side dock workers, moving off the South Side to discharge a ship on the South Side, it's a coal yank in, well then they get the ferry across, get the ferry back. Now, the other good side of that was, as a kid, you could, on a Thursday, I think, the dockers were paid, in my day anyway, and as a kid, remember borrowing a round boat, and on Thursday especially, and going out, and the lads would work overtime, and they'd be paid as well, you see, so they'd work overtime, and they didn't want to walk all the way up, because no buses running down, so they didn't want to walk all the way up to Butt Bridge, and they give you a shout, give you a shove across, and that was the word, shove across. So we drove over, picked them up, and the ferry, I think, at the time was about, it was old money, 3 pence or 2 pence or whatever it was. And you'd probably get 2 shillings from them, you know what I mean? So it was a good wage, you know. But we got caught out. One of the boys in Rings End, the men in Rings End, gave us a call. The jetty steps in Rings End, and he gave us a call, and we rode in, and he said, to go over, I'm missing a ship, to get over and tie up. He gave us a shovel across, and I said, okay, now we got him in, and we got halfway out, and he said, lads, can you swim? We said, no, well, you better learn, because this is my boat. And threw us in. Can't think of the man's name now. But anyway, so that was, but that was life. And it was all about that interaction between the port and the local communities and the men that walked around it, you know what I mean? So it was,
But it's that sort of, you have to remember as well in terms of the history of it. Ireland, especially if you go back to the early 20th century, is an incredibly poor place. And depending if you're, trying to get a day's work. I mean, I say at the Reeds, for instance, Dockers, could be very clannish. And depending on where you were, there was preference for, if you were from Ringsend and you were a south side, Steve Dorr, there was a preference for giving south siders the jobs. And there's one story that allegedly one Steve Dorr, Ringsend Steve Dorr, said he'd rather give a job to a Ringsend woman than to a north side Docker. So there was that clannish element. So you looked after your own, and I mean, I suppose it was a pragmatism too. You looked after your own, whether friends, family, and you were asking that point earlier on. So you looked after your own first at the Reed, say, and then afterwards looked after the rest.
So people worked hard, but there was a sporting element to things as well, I believe. I think that's covered in the exhibition as well, that there were a number of local teams and the clubs would be based around people who worked in the docks, based on the locality. But would there be large-scale matches between, I don't know, would it be Ringsend versus North Wall or the various clubs?
The rivalries definitely bore themselves out in the likes of football matches and stuff between, you think of East Wall, Ringsend, Talbot United, all these teams, St. Pat's as well. And, they would bear themselves out in those matches, and they were very well attended. And sometimes those local derbies, they'd be held in bigger, the likes of Tolka Park, Dalymount Park even. Right. But football was a very popular sport with Dockers themselves. And there's some great, I suppose, well-known Dockers who played football at a fairly high level, at international level. Ben Hannigan was one of them. East Wall, wasn't he originally? East Wall, and played for Ireland, but very interesting character, Ben Hannigan. One of the guys from the Dock Workers Preservation Society told me a great story about how I think it was an Irish League 11 played a Manchester United team, and Manchester United were short of players, and Ben Hannigan turned out from Manchester midfield, and he was beside the great Bobby Charlton, and Bobby Charlton kept playing through passes in front of Big Ben, and he kept saying, what are you doing, will you play it to my feet? Why you keep passing it in front of me? I'm not running onto it, play it to my feet. And at half time, Bobby Charlton said to the promoter, the guy who had organised the match, he said, I'm not going back on. He said, your man in midfield, that Irish fella, Ben Hannigan, he's giving me no end of grief. And he's not playing. He said, listen, he's just a character. He's only winding you up. Go on. So he went down for the second half. And at the end of the match, your man said to Hannigan, he said, you're winding Charlton up no end. He actually threatened not to come on for the second half. So after that, apparently Ben told anyone he could that he was the guy who taught Bobby Charlton how to pass a ball. But it's the sport, and I think that's the important thing. Well, the lads enjoyed a pint, but not all of them did. I mean, some of them were heavily involved in things like boxing, for instance. One of the lads who was involved in the society, Dick Elliott's father, founded the Dockers Boxing Club. It was in Oriel Street on the north side, So boxing was a big element of it. Football, rowing. I know a lot of rowing. Stella Maris, Patrick's as well. So, and some even went to the theatre together. So it's it's not just, I suppose, the pub side of it as well. It was the opportunity to, I suppose, have the crack beyond the docks as well.
Yeah. Charlie, you would have frequented some pubs, that would have been associated with Dockers. Do you recognise those pubs today in modern Dublin? Have any of them stayed the same, or did the people that went to those pubs kind of congregate elsewhere in other pubs? Or?
No, Docklands now has totally changed all of that. And of course, look, there's new generation, new people have moved in as well. So that whole, I mean, we remember going into was it Seabank now? What was it? I can't think the old name from anyway. But the tar yard. But that would be full on the morning. You know what I mean? Of all sorts of people. You know, not just dockers. There'd be shift workers knocking off.
Labourers,
and you know, so a fella's been working all night and drops in for a pint at 8 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and you know, and someone says, Jesus, you know, going into the pub at that hour of the morning. But if a fella knocking off at 5 o'clock and going in for a pint, it's okay, you know.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, there was that kind of thing around it, you know. So, and the other one was, going into the pub at that hour, there was always a bit of banter going on. And is there something happening? This, you know, is there something we haven't heard about? And there might be a bit of work in it to get down, and you know, so. It was that element of it. No mobile phones. Most people hadn't got phones in their houses anyway. So the only contact you got was to get out. I mean, everyone's contactable now. You know what I mean? It's 24/7. You know what I mean? It's just crazy. At that time, it wasn't. You had to get out. You had to meet with people, and whatever way you met with them was your way of getting on in life and kind of feeding your family.
Mm-hmm. So. I've read that Dockers are very inventive with coming up with nicknames for each other. Would either of you have a few you could share? I say this as my name is John, but my nickname is Leppo, and I've had that for 30 years. I'm 38, and I won't tell you why. It's a boring story, but get great amusement from the endless nicknames that Dockers have shared for each other. Probably long since forgotten where they came from. Saltbox and Appler or two I came across. I don't know where they came from.
Yeah, well, actually, you know, listeners and viewers can look back. Dublin Port Company have done a great video with some dock workers looking at nicknames, the origins of nicknames. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that on YouTube. It's a great video. But as you said, I mean, I suppose nicknames functioned on two levels. The first was that during a read, stevedores and foremen could actually read out the names of men in the crowd just purely from nicknames. A lot of them could.
Right,
so there was just purely by nicknames, you know, and some of them are hilarious. Things like, you know, names like Big Nose Kelly. I mean, that's fairly self-explanatory. You know, he had a big nose, but I suppose it's so inventive. So say his son, when he started on the docks, was called Little Big Nose Kelly. Right. So, you know, it's great fun and it's the crack, but there was the function of it for guys who, you know, they'd use the nicknames, but it was just a bit of fun as well.
I think the other one was, I know there was two Tums Murphy, he was Rings End, but his son worked on the docks, and I think he was Small Tums, or Little Tums. So, you know, it was that was the way it went.
And it came from all sorts of things. So it could be a physical appearance, it could be a trait like that, it could be something funny that happened to you on the docks. You know, as you were saying, all those days like Saltbox and stuff. So in the exhibition, guests will be able to see a collection of nicknames that were compiled by a couple of the dockers, including Paddy Daly, who was a docker himself. And those lists of nicknames are at the end. You can see on the AV in the exhibition. So, I mean, some of them are incredible. Some of them I couldn't probably say in the podcast, but some of them are great. And as I said, there was a function to them. They were using the read, but also, you know, having the crack. It's not just the hardship of dock work, but it's also the humour. And the humour was a form of resiliency. It got you through, and having the crack amongst the men, that, you know, that was the tonic for the hard work. You know what I mean? And yes, there's some great nicknames. I'll think of a few that
I'll give you a few minutes
that are PC that you get away with.
But the process of putting together an exhibition like this, like how long does it take to do it, and how much of it is oral history, and how much of it is primary sources? What different organisations kind of came together to make this a reality?
So obviously primary source material is the historian's bread and butter, and for me as a historian putting this together, there were very poor records kept for dock workers, and that was because it was casualised. So just so your listeners are aware, it was casualised work up until 1961 officially for cross-channel dockers, and then it was slowly incorporated. So it became decasualised work, and then for deep sea dockers in 1971 officially. I mean, as you say, you know, these changes don't happen overnight. But so kind of from the 60s onwards, it became, you know, decasualised. But I suppose the work itself, you know, it's what were you asking me there? Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Putting together
on a tangent.
Putting together the exhibition and the various people that entails.
So there's very, very poor records basically there in the sense for the early period. So oral histories, interviews are very important. So some of them have been compiled in, say, the folklore collection that's housed in UCD. Kevin C. Kearns, who professor in, I think he's in Colorado, he's based originally. For those of you who don't know Kevin Kearns, I know you definitely will know him in the context of Dublin Life and Lore at the pub. That he was looking at the pub. Book. So, I mean, Kevin's done some amazing work, not just on the history of the pub, but also on Dublin itself. And he's, and as you mentioned earlier on, I think you said Dublin in the rare old times. If you really want to gain a sense of Dublin, the rare old times, Kevin Kearns' books are fabulous. So he did one on pub life and lore. So, I mean, it was great to get some information from Kevin's work, but from the lads themselves, so and the family members as well. So the Dublin Dock Workers Preservation Society, we work very closely with its members. And I mean, they're walking artefacts, they're walking primary sources themselves. So, I mean, all the colour that you'll see in that exhibition comes from the lads and from the family members of Dockers. Dublin Port Company as well, having great, obviously, we're hosting the exhibition in the Substation down on Alexandra Road. The archives there, Lara Joy, Marta Lopez and the team have been fabulous to work with. They provided these incredible little slides, 35mm slides, over 400 of them there. And it's very unusual because they're colourised images of dock work and dock life from the 1950s and the 1960s. So it was illegal to take photographs of dock work. You couldn't take photographs of it. Now, obviously, some people did, but you couldn't because of the sensitivity of the cargo. You know, there was quite expensive commodities being imported. So these are very unusual to have these. So we've been able to include these never-before-seen images in the exhibition itself, and that gives a great colour to it. There's another fabulous book for anyone who wants to know more by Aileen Carroll and Don Bennett, The Dublin Docker. But it's, you know, to get over that in terms of the dearth of primary source material, it's, you know, the Dockers themselves can add such colour to it. You know?
I think the lads came, I can't remember how far back, Declan and Wiley and Jimmy and the lads came.
Paddy,
and they, you know, they wanted to preserve their history. You know, I mean, if you know, and that's what they, you know, and no one was preserving that. You know what I mean? That it wouldn't have been brought out to the forefront unless them lads came along and said, look, you know. And I think it was Declan said, you know, we're all on our way out here, and who's gonna, you know, who's gonna hold all this material, and you got to get it out, you know. And in fairness to them, they've worked hard on it. They got it to, you know, this exhibition in the port, and other stuff that's happened around the port that we've done, like we've done plays, you know, and the lads fed into that. They talked to the writers and, you know, and give them the information. So they made the plays were made real. Roddy Doyle had a lot to do with stuff, and you know, so it's a history that people kind of could forget. But they brought it back, and it's one of those things that they should be proud of. But it's now, it's open now to the public, and people can go in and have a look at all of that. You know, the grandkids and great grandkids of all of, you know, people who have gone can come down and have a look and see that exhibition in the Substation. And it is a great exhibition, and that whole, you know, the slideshows and the video is there, and it's an amazing place. I mean, I've learned a lot from it. So it's but look, and you have to give recognition to the lads coming along and saying you need. And I can't remember how many years ago, but it could have been 15 years ago or more, that they came along and said, look, you know, we need to preserve this, and this is it now, you know. So it's great.
It's important to keep that legacy alive, because as you said earlier on, it's that idea of the port as being distant. But what happens in Dublin Port then, you know, and now, is invaluable to the economic life of this country, and people just take it for granted. So, you know, using the legacy of the Dockers, you know, we can tell their story. And, you know, for me, you know, I'm going to sound a bit cringe here, right, John? But as a historian, I think the past, you know, it's a teacher. And for me, looking at the past and looking at history, it's a kind of a life philosophy. You can learn from the past. And looking at the case of the Dockers, I mean, there's so many great life lessons that they really inspire us. You know, the importance of resiliency, hard work, and a bit of crack and a bit of humour, even when times get tough. So, you know.
Yeah. Kind of history turns itself in a bit in that, and maybe it should be done, but there was a survey done within the port now of dock workers. A lot of them now are coming from the local area. So, I mean, that employment is coming in now. And, I mean, we know kids along the road, well, kids, they're men now, but they, and they're all working on the docks now. And, you know, it's kind of the world turns in that, you know, containerisation came in and all this strife that happened in the 80s and all the DCH, you know, companies and liquidations. And it's taking that time for all to settle down again. Because the economy still has to go. We still have to get all these goods to the market. And you have to get them in quicker now. Because it's on time stuff. You know what I mean? Your bread arrives this morning to be on the shelf at 8 o'clock and all this type of stuff. So it's a lot more technical now. But the employment is coming back and we can see it. So, I mean, as I say, I know a lot of local people now working on the docks, where it's coming back to that again, you know. Yeah.
I think they're two very pleasant perspectives to end our podcast discussion for today. I neglected at the start to say thanks to Des, Pat, and all the team at Cleary, so I'd like to say thanks very much. Now, you might have heard some slurping sounds from the three of us because we've devoured a pint each during the course of the discussion. Once again, you can see the exhibition. You can see us in the Substation building Thursday to Sunday, 11:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. It's on Alexandra Road. You'll also probably see, if you're going to any good pub anytime soon, you'll see these lovely beer mats advertising the exhibition Solidarity, the Dockers of Dublin Port, and you'll likely see them in the pubs of Ringsend and anywhere Dockers used to or do frequent. So I'd like to thank very much Charlie and Daryl for joining me and sharing their memories and their insights about the exhibition, about Dublin history and about the Dockers in general. And thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.